Hello, this is Lauren speaking, and welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to be doing a rectification, a birth time rectification on the state of Israel, the birth chart, sharing some fascinating information with you, and also looking at the current activity, transit activity, and leading into the near future, so we can see what's going on exactly. So let's get started with this. First, I just want to make a little note here, please, that if anyone out there is going to be using the birth time that I've come up with and my work, please reference this video or reference my name should you be publishing any information online using this birth time. So thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on here. Let's get into it. Now, very, very interesting. Israel was established on May 14th, 1948 in Tel Aviv. And there was a meeting called for by the first Prime Minister, Ben-Gurion, at 4 p.m. to declare the independence of Israel. And that meeting ended at 4:32 p.m. So we know that there is an accurate birth time somewhere in there between 4 and 4:32 p.m. Just to state a few more things about the source notes that are coming from Astro.com, it says here that the meeting began precisely at 4 p.m. as arranged. Ben-Gurion finished reading the independence statement and manifesto at 4:24 p.m., and the scroll of independence was then signed by the 24 members of the National Committee who were present. The meeting concluded at 4:32 p.m. when Ben-Gurion spoke the words, "Israel has been born." Okay? So that. Now, I want to make one interesting point here about birth time rectification and electional astrology. Electional astrology is when we choose a birth time for an event. For example, if we're getting married. If we're getting married, it is the time that the bride and groom exchange their vows and say, "I do." That marks the birth time minute of a marriage, we could say. It is not the time on the invitations when the guests were called to come to the wedding. It is not when the ceremony ended. It is when they exchanged their vows. Likewise, buying and selling a home. It is the time that the contract or the deed of the home is signed to the new buyer's name. It is not the time that was arranged for the meeting with the realtor and the prospective buyers, and it is not the time that the meeting ended. Okay? So it's very clear that either it's a statement or a signature that declares when an event occurs. Okay? Keep that in mind. Very important. Now, how did I get interested in doing this? Well, in lieu of what's going on with the conflict in the Middle East, without going into great detail, we all know what's going on. I wanted to look at a chart, the precise moment that this conflict began. And it began on October 7th, 2023, and I did some research, and I found that the first, let's say, sounds of explosions or boom boom, whatever, was at 6:30 in the morning. And therefore, I brought up a chart for October 7th, 2023 at 6:30 a.m. in Tel Aviv, because that is the capital and where the government resides. And I thought, wow, look at that. This is really interesting. Transiting Mars is precisely at 26 degrees of Libra. That would be like practically conjunct the ascendant of Israel. And transiting Pluto was at 27 Capricorn, 53 minutes of arc, almost 28 degrees of Capricorn, which would mean that it would square into the ascendant. Okay, that's a very powerful statement, because the ascendant of a nation are the people and the people's voice, okay? And, well, Mars is the planet of war and attack, and Pluto is the planet of force and control. Okay, so I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. So let me see, if I play around with birth times, if these, let's say the transit of Pluto squared to the ascendant would be exactly or close to October 7th, 2023. And so I was working with a birth time between about 4:15 in the afternoon, because that would put the ascendant at 26 Libra, and I was looking at 4:23 p.m. because the ascendant would then be at 27 Libra, 55 minutes of arc, exactly where transiting Pluto was. And I thought, okay, well, I need to test this. I need to check other major events, like a couple other wars and the assassination of a prime minister of Israel, to see how accurate a 4:23 birth time p.m. would be. And this was just mind-blowing for me. So, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, prime minister, took place on November 4th, 1995, at 9:40 p.m. in Tel Aviv. And I brought up that chart, and I couldn't believe it. There was, and by the way, that 4:23 birth time, the midheaven would be at 0 Leo, 33 minutes of arc. Interesting number. As opposed to being in late degrees of Cancer, with an earlier birth time, like at 4:15, it would be at 28 Cancer. Well, no, it made sense to me that the midheaven would be at 0 Leo, without going into a lot of details here, and the number 33 I thought was very interesting, to say the least. But there was transiting Mercury at 0 Scorpio, 44 minutes of arc, square to the midheaven, precisely at that moment. And the midheaven is the head of state, the government in power. And this is when it took place. Fascinating. But not only that, but transiting Uranus was at 26 Capricorn, 53 minutes of arc, square to the ascendant. Well, sudden, unexpected event. A shock to the people, of course. And then it got even more interesting, because it just so happened that at that moment in time, the ascendant was at 25 Cancer, a cardinal sign, and the midheaven was at 25 Capricorn. And not only that, but the north node was at 25 Libra. Well, talk about cardinal signs all around the 25th, 26th degree. Wow. Okay. So I thought, well, that's an interesting confirmation, that transiting Mercury at 0 Scorpio, 44, precisely square to the midheaven. Wow. So I went to look at two other events, two other wars. The 6-Day War, and that was, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll correct this on the screen if I get this wrong, but it's June 5th, 1967. And I wanted to look at the Yom Kippur War, which was in 1973. So let me first shift over to look at the chart of what I saw with the 6-Day War. So June 5th, 1967, attacks began, it said, in the morning. So I'm using a 6 a.m. or birth chart for that event. And there I saw was transiting Jupiter at 2 degrees of Leo, conjunct the midheaven, actually just right in between the natal moon at 4 degrees and the midheaven at 0 degrees. But not only that, there was transiting Venus at 28 Cancer, which would be square to the ascendant. Well, that's interesting, because Of course, if you're planning a war, and in ancient times, kings would consult and leaders would consult with astrologers, magi, to find out the best time for war, to attack, or whatever the case might be. And of course, you want, always in astrology, you want the most beneficial planets angular in a chart. You want Jupiter and Venus, the most notable bright planets in the sky, to be either conjunct, square, or opposed the midheaven or the ascendant. And also, I thought, well, how interesting too, because I'm going to bring up some points here, that the natal moon, or the transiting moon on that day, was conjunct the North Node. Well, that's a positive thing to have. Okay, so using the 423 birth time, I found that quite fascinating. Now, moving over to the next war, and the next war would be the Yom Kippur War. And I'm just going to my notes here to get the exact date, because I don't want to make any errors here. Oh, yes, and so we have the Yom Kippur War on October 6th, 1973. And so, interestingly enough, I was looking at a timeline of events, and it said that the Prime Minister Golda Meir at the time received a phone call at 3:50 a.m. Alerting her to the possibility of an attack. And lo and behold, what did I see? I saw that the transiting moon, and I just want to get my chart here and make sure that I have the right, accurate information for you. So, yes, let's go to that 350 chart. Here we go. And we bring up that 350 chart in the morning. And, oh, well, there at the bottom of the chart, at the IC, we have the transiting moon exactly at 0 degrees of the fixed sign of Aquarius. And it's 0 degrees 30 minutes of arc. I mean, it's precisely opposed to midheaven. And there's Jupiter again, interestingly enough, at 2 degrees of a fixed sign of Aquarius. So opposed to midheaven. And, interestingly enough, there was Mercury, transiting Mercury, communications, at 4 degrees, square precisely into the moon, the natal moon. Oh, how interesting. Now, as it goes on in the day, on that day, there were sirens that went off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 p.m. And of course, we know that the only thing that's going to make a big difference here would be the transiting moon. And so there, the transiting moon now is precisely at 2 p.m. If you look at the bottom of the chart, it's at 4 degrees of Aquarius, precisely opposed the natal moon at 4 degrees of Leo. Wow. Can't get more precise than that. Let's see if there's something else I wanted to show you about that chart. No, not necessarily. And so just going back here to the, let's go back to this October 7th, 2023 chart at 6:30 in the morning, because I want to show you how uncanny things really get here, is that notice that transiting Jupiter is now precisely conjunct the North Node, okay? So it's not on an angle, but it is precisely conjunct the North Node. That's powerful. And transiting Venus, well, couldn't be more exact than this, is exactly precisely conjunct Mars. Wow, okay, interesting chart, interesting. Okay. So we've got that information there. Now, what really piqued my curiosity is I thought, wow, in those two wars, the 67 war, the 73 war, transiting Jupiter was at 2 degrees of fixed signs, and I thought to myself, well, if I adjust the birth time later to like 4:30 or 4:32, when the meeting ended, maybe that would shift the midheaven to like 2 degrees. But then, as I saw with the transits, this just wasn't fitting. And then I got sort of a light bulb moment, and I said, well, of course, because Jupiter at 2 degrees is precisely at the midpoint of the natal moon and the midheaven. And so I went to my Solar Arcs book by Noel Till, and I looked up the midpoint of Jupiter to the moon, midheaven, midpoint. Jupiter equals moon, midheaven. And I'm quoting right from the book. High enthusiasms, probability of professional success, and then it said, an awakening of religion becomes important. Oh, wow, interesting. That's a powerful point, that midpoint of the moon in the midheaven. And then, not only that, but in one of the charts of the war that I showed you with Venus up there, right at the midheaven, that would create a midpoint of the midheaven being equal to, or right in the middle of the natal moon and transiting Venus at that moment, and it said success, feeling valuable. So these are very successful points, and of course having Venus and Jupiter elevated up there, well, you know, that's a great time to get involved in a war for it to work out in your favor. Yeah? So, at any rate, using the 4:23 p.m. time for October 7th, 2023, that transit of Pluto square the ascendant would be, and listen carefully, would be an extended transit from March of 2023 straight through to November. Excuse me, let me just verify my notes here, sorry about that. Straight through, scratch that, from March, I apologize, 2022, straight through the last hit on October 23rd, 2023. And just before the last hit of transiting Pluto square ascendant would be the retrograde hit on September 28th, 2023. And therefore, right between the last retrograde hit and the last hit of transiting Pluto square ascendant, boom, we've got the Gaza, Hamas, Israel conflict started October 7th, 2023. Well, it just can't be more precise than that. It just can't be. And so therefore, based on the work that I've done here, 4:23 p.m. makes sense in lieu of the fact that the signing of the Independence Scroll had to be signed, and it fits right in perfectly. It's 1 minute before 4:24 p.m. Okay, so that's what we've got for the birth time rectification that I'm certainly using at 4:23 p.m. And by the way, just to throw this out there, if it was at 4:30 or 4:32, well, the transit of Pluto square the ascendant would not hit precise, not even in the months of September, October, when this began, and would actually, yeah, we'll leave it at that. And at 4:32, same situation. Same situation. So at any rate, testing, as I've shown you, the assassination, the two wars, it's a perfect time. Certainly accurate, without a doubt. And of course, we're talking about minutes here, but, you know, with astrology, we like to be as precise as possible, and we like to do birth time rectification accurately, okay? So I'm going to leave it at that for the birth time rectification and move on to what is going on with the other astrological activity, okay?